The hangar was silent, except for the frustrated clatter of tools echoing off steel walls. The F-22 Raptor, the pride of American air power, the symbol of cutting-edge strength, sat lifeless. Its engine refused to start. Engineers had tried everything. Wires were checked, systems rebooted, manuals flipped through with sweaty hands. Nothing worked, and every passing second mattered. The aircraft wasn't meant to sit still. It was meant to fly, to defend, to strike with precision. Yet here it was, grounded. Whispers spread among the crew. Some blamed faulty parts, others suspected an electrical nightmare. But one truth lingered. If the Raptor couldn't launch, a critical mission would fail. A mission lives depended on. The base commander felt the weight pressing on his chest. Then came a suggestion, half-mocked, half-hesitant. There's an old veteran. Someone who worked on these birds before anyone else. The general paused. A forgotten Air Force mechanic, long retired, dismissed by many as yesterday's man. Could he be the answer? This is the story of a veteran who was mocked, overlooked, and nearly forgotten, until the day the most advanced fighter in the world refused to fly without him. The morning at the airbase had begun like any other. The crews were up early, flight suits pressed, and the hangar buzzed with the usual rhythm of preparation. Yet as the sun rose higher, casting long beams of light across the polished floor, something unusual broke that rhythm. At the center of the hangar, surrounded by ladders, tool carts, and a ring of anxious engineers, stood the F-22 Raptor. Its sleek frame gleamed under the lights, wings poised like a predator ready to strike. But the truth was painfully clear. The Raptor was grounded. Its heart, the engine that defined its unmatched power, refused to start. An uneasy quiet settled over the room. The younger engineers tapped keyboards and scrolled through technical manuals, their brows furrowed in frustration. The older ones muttered theories, fuel pump issues, ignition circuits, software glitches, but none could get the bird to roar back to life. Each attempt ended the same way, silence. For an F-22, silence was not just inconvenient. It was dangerous. Missions depended on this aircraft. Soldiers in the field were counting on it for support. And now, a billion-dollar war machine sat useless, as if mocking the men and women sworn to keep it flying. The general stood nearby, arms crossed, his jaw clenched. He didn't bark orders this time. He didn't need to. Everyone already felt the pressure. This was more than a technical failure. It was a failure of trust, of readiness, of responsibility. He could see it in their eyes, the doubt creeping in, the fear of letting their country down. One of the junior lieutenants tried to lighten the mood. "Sir, maybe she just doesn't want to wake up today," he joked nervously. Nobody laughed. The general's stern gaze cut the air sharper than any reprimand. Hours dragged on. Sweat beaded across foreheads, uniforms dampened, and frustration turned into desperation. The Raptor was built to be flawless, nearly untouchable. But here it was, showing its most human side, weakness. Finally, the chief engineer stepped forward, admitting what nobody wanted to say out loud. "Sir, we're out of options. We've run every diagnostic. It's not responding. We don't know what's wrong." The words hit the hangar like a cold wind. Out of options. In a world where precision meant survival, out of options was unacceptable. The general inhaled slowly, steadying himself. He had carried the weight of countless decisions before, missions, deployments, men and women's lives. But this was different. It wasn't about commanding troops or planning strategy. It was about trust in the machine that was supposed to give them an edge. And that's when a quiet voice spoke from the back of the hangar. "There's one man who might know what to do." Heads turned. The voice belonged to a senior sergeant, a man close to retirement, his uniform worn with the kind of creases that told of long service. He hesitated before repeating himself. A veteran. He worked on these Raptors when they first rolled out. Back before they were legends. Back when they were just experiments. The lieutenant scoffed. "Sir, with all due respect, you're suggesting we drag in some retired mechanic to fix something our top engineers can't handle." The sergeant held his ground. Not just any mechanic. He was there at the beginning. He trained half the men who trained us. He knows these engines like they were his own blood. Silence returned, but this time it was different. The general studied the sergeant's face, looking for hesitation. There was none. Just conviction. For a moment, the general weighed the absurdity of the idea. Calling back a forgotten veteran, a man long past his service years, seemed almost desperate. And yet, desperation was exactly what this moment demanded. He finally spoke. "Get me his name." The hangar shifted. Whispers spread. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others, though skeptical, clung to a small spark of hope. The sergeant nodded, his voice low. "His name is Master Sergeant Raymond Cole. Retired nearly 20 years. People called him the Raptor Whisperer. Back then, if something broke, if something didn't make sense, he was the one everyone turned to. Some said he could listen to the engine hum and tell you exactly what was wrong." The general narrowed his eyes. A forgotten name. A forgotten man. A relic of the past. Yet somehow, this name carried weight, like the echo of a time when machines and men shared a bond deeper than manuals and codes. The lieutenant protested again. "Sir, with respect, this is highly irregular. We've got state-of-the-art diagnostics, specialists trained on every inch of this aircraft. And we're calling in a man who probably hasn't touched one in 2 decades. The general didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted back to the lifeless Raptor. Then, almost as if speaking to himself, he murmured, "Sometimes, the past holds answers the present can't find." He turned sharply to the sergeant. "Contact him. Now." The order rang through the hangar, undeniable. Doubt lingered, but so did a sense of anticipation. For all their expertise, for all their modern tools, the engineers had failed. Now, everything depended on a forgotten veteran, a man the Air Force itself had nearly left behind. As the sergeant moved quickly to make the call, the others exchanged uncertain glances. Some smirked, expecting nothing. Others, deep inside, felt something stir, a strange respect for the idea that maybe, just maybe, the wisdom of the past still had a place in the fight for today. The general didn't say another word. He simply stared at the silent F-22, its shadow stretching long across the floor, and thought about the man who might hold the key to waking it. A veteran. A forgotten hero. A man the world no longer remembered, but who might soon prove that true skill, true dedication, never fades with time. The call went out, and hours later, an old pickup truck rolled slowly toward the base gate. Its paint was chipped, its bed rattled with the weight of worn-out tools, and behind the wheel sat a man who looked like time itself had weathered him. Master Sergeant Raymond Cole. His hair was silver now, his back not as straight as it once was. Deep lines marked his face, carved by decades of sun, grit, and sleepless nights spent under aircraft wings. His eyes, though, his eyes were sharp, clear, unwavering. They carried the weight of battles fought not on the front lines, but in the hangars and flight lines, where soldier sacrifice wasn't about bullets but about sweat, patience, and battlefield courage of a different kind, keeping machines alive so soldiers could come home. At the gate, young guards exchanged doubtful glances. To them, he looked like any ordinary retiree. No polished boots, no pressed uniform, just a faded bomber jacket with patches barely holding on and a cap that read Air Force Veteran. "Sir, base access requires clearance," one of the guards said firmly, suspicion in his voice. Cole didn't argue. He simply handed over a worn ID card, edges frayed from years in a wallet. The guard studied it, then looked back at him with doubt. Before he could question further, a black sedan pulled up, and the general himself stepped out. The shift was instant. The guards straightened, saluting sharply. The general's presence demanded it. He walked toward Cole with the authority of command, yet his eyes softened with recognition. "Master Sergeant Cole," the general said, extending his hand. "It's been a long time." Cole shook his hand firmly, his voice steady. "Sir, I hear you've got a bird that refuses to sing." The general allowed the faintest hint of a smile. "That's one way to put it." The guards looked stunned. This old man, this forgotten figure, was being welcomed by the general himself. It was a moment that silently demanded respect, though many still struggled to see why. When Cole entered the hangar, every eye followed him. Engineers paused mid-task. Some whispered, others smirked. To them, this was almost laughable, a desperate attempt to solve a modern problem with an old, outdated solution. A young lieutenant, the same one who had scoffed earlier, muttered under his breath, "This is a waste of time." His words weren't loud, but they carried, slicing the silence. Cole heard it. He didn't react with anger or pride. He simply kept walking, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. He approached the F-22 like a man greeting an old friend. His hand brushed lightly against the fuselage, fingers tracing its lines with reverence. "She hasn't changed much," he murmured softly, almost to himself. "Still stubborn when she wants to be." The engineers exchanged glances. Some rolled their eyes. To them, this was sentimental nonsense, not science. Yet there was something about the way Cole looked at the jet, not as a machine, but as a living thing, that made even the skeptics pause. The general broke the silence. "We've run every diagnostic. Nothing works. If she doesn't launch, the mission fails. Lives are at stake." Cole nodded slowly. "I understand." He set down his old tool bag. It was leather, worn and scuffed, carrying the marks of decades of service. Unlike the shiny cases around the hangar, his bag looked ordinary until he unzipped it. Inside, every tool was clean, polished, arranged with precision. Tools that had seen countless nights under countless aircraft, each one part of his story. He pulled out a small flashlight, clicked it on, and leaned into the engine bay. His movements were deliberate, calm, unhurried, so unlike the frantic scrambling that had filled the hangar earlier. "Sir," one engineer began, irritation in his voice. "With respect, we've already checked the circuits, the fuel lines, the intake." Cole interrupted, not with words, but with a simple gesture, the raising of a finger. It wasn't disrespectful. It was commanding in its quietness, a reminder of rank and experience that no longer needed a uniform to prove it. The engineer fell silent. Minutes passed. Cole's eyes scanned details others had overlooked. He listened, not just to the systems, but to the silence itself, as though it spoke to him. He touched parts gently, feeling vibrations, subtle inconsistencies. Finally, he spoke. "She's choking herself." The words puzzled the engineers. "Choking?" one repeated. Cole straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "The startup sequence is flooding the combustion chamber. Too much fuel pressure at the wrong time. She won't start because she can't breathe." The engineers shook their heads. "That doesn't make sense," the lieutenant said dismissively. "The computer systems regulate all that. It's impossible." Cole's eyes narrowed slightly. "Impossible? Son, I was working on these engines before you knew how to spell thrust vectoring. Computers don't make mistakes, but the people who program them do. If you trust the system more than the machine, you'll never hear what she's trying to tell you." The hangar fell silent again. The general's expression didn't change, but his eyes revealed something the others missed: trust. He believed this veteran. "Can you fix it?" the general asked. Cole gave a slow nod. "I'll need a little time. And I'll need your engineers to follow orders, not manuals." That last line struck hard. Some bristled. Others looked ashamed. But the general's answer was immediate: "You have everything you need." With that, Cole began. He directed the crew, not with arrogance, but with clarity. "Adjust this valve. Reset that sequence. Bypass the automated regulator, just for startup." Every instruction was simple, precise, and carried the weight of experience earned, not taught. The lieutenant, still skeptical, muttered to a colleague, "If this works, I'll salute him myself." Cole heard him again. This time, he smiled faintly, without turning his head. "Be ready then, son." As the crew worked under his guidance, something shifted in the hangar. The smirks faded. The whispers died. Even the skeptics found themselves watching closely, not wanting to miss the quiet authority of a man who clearly belonged here, no matter how many years had passed. The general watched too, his arms folded, his mind steady. He knew something the younger men had yet to learn. True mastery doesn't retire. It doesn't fade. It lives forever in those who sacrificed pieces of themselves for the sake of others. And Master Sergeant Raymond Cole, forgotten by time, mocked by some, was about to remind them all what it meant to be a real war hero, even without a uniform. The hangar lights glared down like spotlights, and the atmosphere thickened with anticipation. Every eye was fixed on the F-22 as Master Sergeant Raymond Cole climbed the maintenance ladder, his movements calm but deliberate. The engineers stood back, some with folded arms, some fidgeting nervously, and others whispering under their breath. It felt less like an engine test and more like a trial, a reckoning. Could this forgotten veteran really breathe life into a machine that the best-trained minds of today couldn't awaken? Cole reached the cockpit, lowered himself inside, and sat in silence for a long moment. His hand rested on the throttle. He closed his eyes, not to hesitate, but to remember. He wasn't just looking at switches, he was replaying decades of knowledge, recalling nights under floodlights with grease-stained fingers and ears tuned to the subtlest mechanical whispers. When he finally opened his eyes, they were steady and sharp. He keyed the intercom. "All right. We're going to run the sequence my way. Everyone follow closely." The general gave a single nod, his voice firm. "You heard him. Do it." The engineers took their stations. Some reluctantly, others with curiosity, all of them with hearts pounding harder than they admitted. Cole adjusted the settings, bypassing the computer-controlled regulator, and gave the order, "Prime the fuel. Slowly. Don't let her choke." The crew moved with precision. Gauges flickered. Lights on the control panel came alive. A hum began, soft at first, like the heartbeat of a giant stirring from sleep. "Now, engage starter sequence." The whine of the starter motor filled the hangar. For a moment, hope surged, only to collapse again as the engine sputtered, coughed, and fell silent. The sound of failure echoed in the vast room. The lieutenant smirked, whispering, "Just like I said, waste of time." But Cole didn't flinch. He didn't curse, didn't panic. He simply leaned back in the seat, listening, absorbing the sound of that sputter as though it was a secret only he could understand. He keyed the intercom again. "She's close. I heard it. Reset, and this time, cut the fuel pressure earlier." The engineers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them spoke up. "Sir, if we cut too soon, it won't ignite at all." Cole's reply was calm, unwavering. "Trust me. She's telling me what she needs. Don't argue. Do it." The general's voice cut in before anyone else could resist. "You heard him. Execute." The crew moved again, reluctantly but obediently. They adjusted the sequence, hands hovering nervously over controls. Cole's hand gripped the throttle. His voice dropped to almost a whisper, though the intercom carried it clearly. "Come on, girl, show them you're still alive." He gave the order. "Starter, engage." The whine returned, louder this time. The engine coughed again, then roared briefly before dying. Gasps filled the hangar. She had come closer, but still, silence followed. A few engineers shook their heads, convinced it was pointless. The lieutenant rolled his eyes dramatically. "3 tries and we'll be right back where we started." Cole's voice broke through, steady as stone. "She's not fighting us. She's asking us to listen. One more adjustment. Manual override on the ignition timing. I want it 5 seconds later than the system allows." That request froze the crew. One engineer snapped back, "Sir, that's not protocol. The system is calibrated for safety." Cole's eyes burned through him. Safety doesn't get planes off the ground. Understanding does. You think this bird was built from a manual? No. She was built from men and women who weren't afraid to push her limits. "Do what I said." The general's voice thundered across the hangar. "Do it." The crew obeyed. Slowly, reluctantly, but they obeyed. The adjustments were made. The override set. The hangar went still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Cole rested both hands on the controls. His jaw tightened. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of generations of service. One last time. The starter whined. The sound grew, rising in pitch, echoing against steel walls. Then came the cough, the familiar, dreaded cough. But this time it didn't die. It deepened. It growled. Flames licked the exhaust. The engine roared to life with a thunder that shook the hangar floor. The F-22 was awake. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, glorious. The lifeless machine had transformed into a beast of war, its engine snarling with the power that made it a legend. Dust swirled across the hangar floor, papers scattered, and the engineers instinctively stepped back, shielding their ears. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They simply stared at the jet, alive again, its roar filling not just the hangar, but their very chests. Cole sat calmly in the cockpit, his face illuminated by the glow of the instruments. He didn't cheer. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded to himself, like a man who had just reunited with an old friend and found her exactly as he remembered. The general broke the silence. His voice was low but carried weight. "Outstanding, Master Sergeant." The engineers erupted, not in cheers, not at first, but in stunned exclamations. Some laughed nervously, unable to believe what they had just seen. Others clapped each other on the shoulders. And slowly, respect began to replace doubt. The lieutenant, the loudest skeptic of them all, stood frozen. His smirk was gone. His face was pale, his pride crushed. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he stepped forward, raised his hand to his forehead, and gave Cole a sharp salute. Cole looked down from the cockpit. His reply was simple, a nod. Nothing more. Because true respect, true honor, didn't need grand gestures. It lived in quiet moments like this. The roar of the engine continued, steady and strong, filling the hangar with a sound that felt less like machinery and more like a heartbeat. A heartbeat restored by the hands of a forgotten hero. In that moment, the men and women in that hangar learned something they'd never forget. Technology evolves, but wisdom endures. Manuals can guide you, but experience teaches you to listen. And sometimes, the future can only fly because the past still whispers in the background. Master Sergeant Raymond Cole had reminded them all. Soldier sacrifice doesn't always happen on the battlefield. Sometimes, it happens in the shadows, in the silence, in the hands of those who keep others alive by keeping machines alive. And though he wore no uniform, though time had lined his face and slowed his step, Cole stood taller that day than anyone else in the hangar. The F-22's engine thundered on, alive again, because a forgotten veteran refused to let her die. The F-22's roar echoed long after the test. Even when the throttle eased and silence slowly reclaimed the hangar, the memory of that thunder stayed inside every chest. For a moment, the engineers, mechanics, and officers weren't thinking about manuals or protocols. They were thinking about the man who had just proven that forgotten heroes never truly fade. Master Sergeant Raymond Cole climbed down from the cockpit, moving carefully but with dignity. His boots hit the floor, and all eyes turned to him. He didn't bask in the attention. He simply wiped his hands on his rag, folded it, and tucked it into his tool bag. To him, this wasn't a performance, it was duty. And duty never demanded applause. But applause came anyway. Slowly at first, one engineer clapping, then another. Soon, the entire hangar echoed with it. The sound wasn't casual or forced. It was deep, raw, filled with respect. Some clapped with tears in their eyes, realizing they had doubted him. Others clapped to drown out the shame of mocking him earlier. Cole looked around, humbled. His eyes weren't proud. They were tired, reflective, as if remembering all the long nights and sacrifices that had brought him here. The general stepped forward, his boots striking the floor like punctuation. He raised his hand in a crisp salute. The hangar froze. Everyone knew what that meant. A general saluting a retired master sergeant wasn't just respect. It was acknowledgement of something greater than rank. Cole hesitated, then slowly returned the salute. The hangar erupted in renewed applause, louder, stronger. Even the skeptical lieutenant stood at attention, saluting with every ounce of sincerity he had left. But the story wasn't over. Within hours, the F-22 was prepped for launch. The mission that had nearly been lost was back on track. The pilot climbed in, systems checked green across the board, and the engine started flawlessly. The aircraft taxied out, its shadow stretching long across the runway. Cole stood with the general at the observation deck, watching silently. When the Raptor roared down the runway and lifted into the sky, both men stood motionless. The jet cut through the clouds, a streak of speed and power, a reminder of why it mattered. The general broke the silence. You saved more than an aircraft today. You saved lives. You reminded this base what true service looks like. Cole shook his head gently. I didn't save anyone, sir. That plane did. I just reminded her how to breathe. The general studied him, then nodded. No. You reminded us how to listen. When the mission report came in hours later, the news spread fast. The operation was a success. Ground forces had been supported, lives had been protected, and the F-22 had played its part flawlessly. And in the quiet corners of the base, conversations turned not to the aircraft, but to the veteran who had made it possible. Days later, a small ceremony was held in the hangar. There was no press, no cameras, no spectacle. Just soldiers, airmen, and engineers standing shoulder to shoulder, gathered around the very jet that had nearly been lost. The general addressed them briefly. We are surrounded every day by stories of technology, progress, and power. But behind every machine stands a person, a real war hero, whose sacrifice, dedication, and wisdom make it possible. Today, we honor one of those forgotten heroes, Master Sergeant Raymond Cole. The applause returned, thunderous and sincere. Cole stood humbly, his old bomber jacket zipped tight, his cap shading his eyes. He never sought recognition. Yet here it was, forced upon him by the truth that could no longer be ignored. The general presented him with a plaque, not for fixing an engine, but for reminding them all of something greater. Inscribed were the words, "For wisdom beyond manuals, for sacrifice beyond duty, for reminding us that forgotten heroes still keep us flying." Cole accepted it quietly, his voice low when he finally spoke. I didn't do this alone. Every one of you, your hands, your hearts, you're the reason these birds fly. Don't forget that. Don't ever forget that. And with those words, he stepped back. The ceremony ended, but the story did not. For weeks, young airmen told it in hushed tones. The day an old veteran came back and started what no one else could. They called it a miracle. Cole just called it another day of service. As he drove away in his old pickup truck, the sun setting behind him, the general watched from a distance. He knew he might never see the man again. But he also knew one truth would remain. The Air Force had not just been built on steel and engines. It had been built on men like Raymond Cole. Men whose battlefield courage was found not in combat, but in keeping others alive. Men who represented the very soul of a military tribute. A reminder that soldier sacrifice comes in many forms. And though the world might forget his name again, those who stood in that hangar would never forget. They had seen what true mastery looked like. They had witnessed what it meant to be an unsung hero. Cole drove into the horizon, the plaque resting on the seat beside him. He didn't need it. His legacy was written not on wood or metal, but in the skies above, every time a jet roared, alive because someone like him had cared enough to make sure it could. That day, a forgotten Air Force veteran had proven a timeless truth. Real war heroes are not always the ones in the spotlight. Sometimes, they are the ones in the shadows, waiting quietly, until the moment comes when their hands, their wisdom, and their sacrifice remind us what honor truly means.